Joining us today, Sabrina Nanji, to discuss the recent Auditor General's report on the Greenbelt Development by the Ford government. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, Elliot, take it away.
Okay, so for our first question, could you please explain to our viewers what just took place yesterday?
Yeah, it was a big day at Queen's Park. Usually it's pretty quiet in the summer, but this was an explosive bombshell report from our Auditor General, Bonnie Lysyk, who has been digging into the Greenbelt land swap. And as you guys know, this has been a controversy that's been dogging the Ford government for months. And she shed some light on some suspicions I think that a lot of people had. Opposition critics were alleging that developers with ties to the PC party, including donors, people that have been friendly with the Ford government, that they had been tipped off that the Greenbelt lands would be opened up. And as we know, they're very valuable parcels of land. But really, in fact, what the Auditor General has shown us is that these developers had a huge role, a heavy hand in getting those lands opened up in the first place. They kind of pinned the blame a little bit on this chief of staff to the housing minister, that's Steve Clark. But also, the premier was up like an hour later, really, kind of doing some damage control, telling people that the process was flawed, it was biased. He accepted that, but they kind of are digging in their heels. They're plowing ahead with the plans to open up these lands to the Greenbelt. No one's getting shuffled out or really punished, which is usually what happens in politics after a scandal like this. But it's not over yet. There's still investigations from the ethics commissioner. The OPP has been sniffing around, kind of doing a review of what's going on. And so this could be the beginning of a really big headache for the Ford government.
Ford took a lot of responsibility for the whole thing. That if if that if if that was a political move, it didn't really help him as much as people continue to criticize him and his government for the whole thing. He doesn't even appear to receive much appeals from calling the integrity commissioner to investigate the Minister Steve Clark's chief of staff. What does the premier need to do to get back into a good looks for Ontarians?
That's a great question, Elliot. And I'm pretty sure it's one that the Ford government is asking themselves right now, because you're right. Taking responsibility, as much as the premier said the buck stops with him, I think a lot of his defense yesterday kind of backfired on him, because him and his minister said they weren't really aware of what was going on up until really the day they signed off on it at cabinet. And that really begs the question of who's in charge at Queen's Park, because as we know, chiefs of staff are not elected. And for a lot of people, even former Premier Kathleen Wynne was saying it's really not believable what they're saying, because ministers, the premier, they should know what their staff is doing. And as the Auditor General pointed out, the Premier's office's mandate letter, which is kind of his marching orders to his minister, said open up the Greenbelt. The Premier's office put this chief of staff in charge of this project. And obviously, the Auditor General said it wasn't really a process, it was more of a political exercise. But you're right. One of her recommendations was to have the Integrity Commissioner look into the chief of staff specifically over some of these concerns around the process. And the Integrity Commissioner confirmed today that they are reviewing this. And so the Integrity Commissioner has his own rules and his own process for if he's going to launch a formal investigation. He's already looking into the housing minister on this matter. And because it seems like the chief of staff had a really big role in this, I think it's likely the Integrity Commissioner will look into it as well. As for what Ford can do to get back into people's good books, I think that some heads need to roll. Potentially Steve Clark could be in the penalty box. There's been a lot of rumors around Queens Park about a summer cabinet shuffle, but he's kind of been rallying the troops. He's been standing behind his minister right now. So I think the government might end up waiting until the Integrity Commissioner comes out with his report, and then decide to get rid of a staffer if the report doesn't look so good. But for now, they're digging in their heels. They're putting up a defense. They put out some advertising on radio and on social media to kind of say this is all about housing. But as much as housing is a crisis in Ontario and needs to be fixed, I think there's a lot of major questions about how this was carried out.
Well, and also with the federal Liberal shuffling their cabinet to maybe like look better or whatever, that could be a possible move for the Ford government. Anyway, so what does the new information mean for development in the Greenbelt?
I mean, really, nothing is changing at this point. It's sort of steady as she goes, and despite all the controversy around this, I mean, three developers in particular stand to gain a lot here. The Auditor General put the number at $8.3 billion is what this land is worth. But the Auditor General is just one report saying that this land wasn't even really necessary to be unlocked. Previously protected land, it wasn't necessary. Ontario has plenty of land that's already available for development in order to meet the Ford government's ambitious housing goal of 1.5 million homes over the next decade. And so I think there's still going to be a lot of questions about this. The opposition critics are basically having a field day. But as we know, the opposition is kind of weak right now. The Liberals don't have a leader. They're in third place. They're not even recognized party status. Marit Stiles has sort of failed to, make a big splash as new leader of the NDP. And so I think that their work is really cut out for them in terms of the opposition parties. But the real problem for Doug Ford, I think, here is in 2026, when the next election comes around, if there's not any new housing, as much housing as they've promised up until then, I think that the public is going to punish them at the polls, and they could be in real danger of losing their majority that they have right now.
So is it all clear whether Minister Ford or Minister Clark were directly involved in the process or not?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's something that the Integrity Commissioner will help us get to the bottom of. Because as it stands, they're sort of denying their involvement in this, which, like I said, it kind of raises the questions of who's in charge. How do you not really know what's going on in your office? But like I said, like the chief of staff has sort of shouldered a lot of this blame. And while I think it was a good thing that the premier took some responsibility and said, the buck stops with me, I'm the premier, I'm responsible for this, he's not really doing anything to sort of change things here. I mean, the Auditor General's key recommendation was that they should reverse the plan to open up these lands and do a proper process. And then, if things meet the process, which they didn't the first time around, then, potentially you could reopen it again. So I don't think that's really going to fly with the public in terms of their involvement in this, because it raises a lot of questions about, responsibility and how much the premier knows to say that he just got the documents and just found out about these things at the cabinet table when they sign off on it. I mean, it's one thing to sort of deny any wrongdoing. It's another thing to sort of say that these non-elected chiefs of staff are sort of the ones that are in charge and not doing things so well. But the premier says the ends justify the means at the end of the day. That's his defense line here. And so, like I said, if there's not enough housing built by 2026, he could be in real trouble with the public.
Okay, so what are the long-term effects of this report? Does premier have to change? Does the premier Ford have to change his plans for the development in the Greenbelt for housing?
Well, so far that doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but I think the Conservatives are probably going to wait to see how this plays out over the coming months. And like I said, there's other investigations going on right now, other reviews happening. So this could just be the beginning of a very long saga for the Ford government. And maybe then, with public pressure, as we've seen the Ford government do in the past, they might backtrack on this a little bit. I think they might need to probably find a bit more of a scapegoat, if I can put it that way. You know, just having a chief of staff sort of take this blame. I don't think that's really going to cut it with the public here, but it's really going to be up to opposition parties to hold his feet to the fire here. It could get very complicated to sort of backtrack on these development plans. So I'm not sure if that will happen. I do think that this is probably the first real major scandal for the Ford government, because the public already has the impression, as we've seen with some polling, that Premier Doug Ford has sort of favored the insiders and people close to him, people who donate to his party. That's not a great look with the public, and they've definitely punished past governments for that type of behavior.
Yeah, okay. So are there any other important details in the report from the Governor General on the Greenbelt?
Yeah, some things that stood out to me, I think, was that at an industry dinner, the chief of staff got these two packages with information about the lands that they wanted, opened up, just sort of handed to him. And that was sort of how he got bureaucrats to say, this is what we're going to open up. I think that sounds like something out of an episode of like The Sopranos or House of Cards, like that. That was very surprising to me. It really stood out to me. And I think that that's something that a lot of people have questions over about how this was conducted. I think something else that was interesting was the fact that the mandate letter, which, as we know, the Ford government has kept under wraps. They don't want them public. The mandate letter that came out to the housing minister right after they were reelected last year basically said, we're going to open up the Greenbelt. And as we know publicly, they said they weren't going to do that. And so I think this is a major credibility issue for the Ford government. And while the Auditor General shed light on a lot of the decision-making process here, I think it raises so many more questions, and reporters, commissioners, potentially even the police are going to be digging into this to see what really happened.